Do we know anything about Councilman Tadgett? Any word? Oh, okay. Hey, G.
How are you?
Pretty fair. Yeah, yourself,
Look at us.
right?
Oh, good. It's opening, and it's on too.
Let me know when we have a green light. Should we do it? All right, it is 6:01, Tuesday evening, June 6th. We are here for a hybrid city council workshop meeting live and in person at the Mill on Main Street. We are also available via Zoom. And we will call this meeting to order. We will start with our first discussion item, climate sustainability plan, cost assessment. Man, it's loud back there. All right, just joking. Cost assessment and implementation plan, and I will turn it over to Melissa.
Good evening. That's kind of loud. Okay, thank you. Melissa Place, Senior Planner with the city. Ooh. That sounds better, maybe. All right, let me continue. Thank you for letting me crash the training this evening with bringing you the climate plan once again. We're on a hot timeline to get this adopted by the end of June in order to get reimbursement from Department of Commerce. So we thought it was important to bring to you this evening the cost assessment and the implementation plan that are both drafts for your review and input. Next Tuesday, we intend to bring the entire plan back to you in draft form and potentially have you consider a date for adoption, whether you want to adopt it potentially next Tuesday or push it off to the 20th or 27th of June. So we can discuss that at the end here. Just wanted to share with you some of the feedback that we received on the plan to date. In the staff report, I mentioned that there were 5 public comments that we had to date. I actually hadn't had a look at those comments at the time that I wrote this. And then I just got an update from the consultants that we have 8 public comments on the draft to date. I printed those off and gave you a copy at your desk, and you should have a copy of all those comments we've received on the plan. Generally speaking, they're all fairly supportive. We have a couple that are had a different opposition to it, but those are the comments we received. We took it to Planning Commission last night, and Planning Commission got to see all the elements of the plan that you've seen to this point, as well as the cost assessment and the implementation plan. And then I've just provided a bulleted summary at your desk as well of the Planning Commission feedback that we heard last night. And then we also received comments from Puget Sound Energy and PUD Electric on the plan. And we've just received those. I've shared them with the consultant, and we are assessing those as well for consideration. And so this evening, you've got attachment 1, which is the cost assessment. And in the cost assessment, it's an analysis of both the costs and benefits of those 10 actions that the city selected prior. And those 10 actions are kind of a mix of those that we could take earlier action on and those that that might have a higher impact rating over the long term to the city. And then in attachment 2, in the implementation plan, that is really meant to prioritize the actions for implementation. And we've got general timeframes, short term, midterm, or long term. And staff has taken a crack at that implementation plan. Really, the cost assessment and the implementation plan go hand in hand in looking at the costs of the particular action, and then of that cost and the rating, equity rating, how does the city want to prioritize that particular action? Do we want to put it in that short term because it's a lower cost or something that we can easily implement, or do we want to put it in the long term and come up with a strategy on how to fund and implement that? So that is essentially the 2 attachments that you've received in your staff report this evening. And what I was looking for council is some sort of direction on the priorities and the implementation plan per the equity report and the cost assessment, any questions you might have, and then ultimately what you would like to do in terms of adoption of this plan, whether you would like to put it for adoption next Tuesday, or if you just want to see the entire plan in draft form next Tuesday, and then slate either the 20th or 27th for adoption. So that is my presentation, and happy to answer any questions or comments you might have at this time.
Melissa, just this is really small print.
Yes.
and I wear glasses and I'm still having a hard time. The cost amount to trigger financing, what, I don't quite understand that. $46,299,967. Is that the cost of this plan that they're talking about? Or is what a community cost amount to trigger financing? What is, I don't get that.
Are you on page 7 of the packet? Sorry, if you can.
Yeah, it's one of the first, it's right after was it the key assumption page?
I think it's
Got-
page 6.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that shows us gas prices are gonna be $5.24 in 2053. Looking forward to that. Excuse me, $5.29.
Oh, I see the community cost assumptions, cost amount to trigger
Yeah.
financing.
Is that a figure that somebody has kind of come up with that said, this is kind of what it's gonna cost the community wholesale to implement this plan?
You know, that's a great question. I haven't dug into that particular number in particular. I'm happy to go back to the consultants and find out a little more information about that. If it doesn't match this on the summary page, my understanding is on page 7, if you scroll to the bottom with the totals, I believe that is the total that there's, I think it's a 10 million and 10,05,720. That's my understanding is would be the cost for the city to implement all these 10 actions. So I don't,
Right, but right next door, there's a cost to the community of 54 million,
a net savings,
or excuse me, net savings.
correct? Yep,
Theoretically.
correct. So I can, I know this cost analysis, there's a lot of information and a lot of detail, and I don't have all the answers, but I'm happy to go ask the consultant and get back to you on that one to double check.
All right, I appreciate
Yes.
that. Thank you.
Mhm.
So I think I have my answer that we'll have to check with the consultants to double check the definitions of cost to city versus cost to community. Do we know, is city referring to government and then community is just the actual city at large? Or how do those two terms?
Yes, that's my understanding. So the cost to the city would be to us as a business city entity. And then for the community at large is, yes, just like you've put it, that is correct.
Okay, and so if I'm reading this right, we're basically saying spend 10 million, save 54 and change, net savings of 44.
Over the overall timeframes that are included in that. And
Right.
I do apologize for how small it is. They were sent to me in an Excel spreadsheet. I had to convert them to a PDF. And then the thought was you could zoom in on them, but they are a little bit hard to work with. So I've asked for the consultant to put that in a easier to read format for the final plan.
Would it be possible to get a copy of that Excel sheet?
Sure. Yeah, I can absolutely send that to all the council members if they'd like that.
Okay, thank you.
Uh-huh.
I did have a question. First of all, thank you, Melissa. You're doing an amazing job and I have high hopes that we're going to make this happen. This is really a question for Mr. Halverson. What direction are we going to get public works vehicles that are electric? Is that something we can do? He needs a mic.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly something we can do through our contract with Enterprise. So this first round would be non-electric vehicles. And then in 3 or 4 years, we would start transitioning that way.
Uh-huh, good.
We do have an order for an electric van for our facilities folks. So
Good.
we're sort of beginning to work
Right.
that way.
I hear you. And they suggested in there, change all streetlights to LEDs. How can we do that? Can we do that?
It's already happening.
It's already happening. Yeah, we just put a check right there. Good job. All right, good. Thank you.
Melissa, can you please repeat what it is you need from us this evening?
Sure. This evening, I'd be looking for any particular specific feedback on either the cost assessment or the implementation plan changes you'd like to see. Prioritization of the particular actions in the implementation plan. If you had a particular they're laid out in staff's best guess of, okay, if this is 300,000, that seems like it's something that we could easily implement in the next couple of years. Something that's over $1 million, we'll need to look at how to fund that over, 4 or 5 years. So we took a stab at that, but if council had a different direction or a choice, a desire in prioritizing some of the actions in the implementation plan, that would be great. And then also I'm looking for in particular when you would like to adopt the plan, if it would be next Tuesday or you want to move it to the 20th or 27th
Okay.
of this month.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Oh. Okay, I'm sorry.
This is Director Wright. Can I add a comment onto that? One of the things we talked about last night with the Planning Commission is this is really a framework plan. So sort of keep that in mind that we're trying to look at goals and policies. We already have some goals and policies in our comprehensive plan. And so really the target for full implementation wouldn't be until 2029. So we know all of these pieces can come back for further review, further refinement. We're just working under a tight time constraint right now. So just recognize that everything in this plan is going to just lay that base work, and that over the next several years, we can come back and again, amend this and look at these goals and policies, how they're integrating, and revisit this anytime over the next several years. So just trying to put that concept out there as well.
That context is helpful. Thank you, Director Wright. Given that, I feel comfortable moving forward at our next meeting and don't have any recommendations at this point to make any changes, but would also want to open it up to the rest of council.
So I guess the only thing I would agree, I just want to confirm, make sure I understand. I kind of got hung up on page 6, some of the financial assumptions. So if all of that is open for discussion down the road as we move through this and implementing it, then I'm fine adopting this earlier rather than later. So I guess that is a question. Is that the case? Is my understanding correct that these numbers we're not committing to anything financially right now?
Correct. Yeah, we're not committing to anything financially. I will find out the answer about the 46 million though from the consultant, get back to you before the next council meeting so that you have that answer.
Any further comments?
Of course. The education campaign. Would you be working through the school system with that? I really think that would be fabulous.
Yes,
Is that
that
what
is
you're
the plan. I believe there's a couple of references in the plan to coordinating with the Lake Stevens School District
Excellent.
regarding that.
Okay. That's really, that's it. I got it. Thank you.
Hey,
So-
speaking of the school district, I think we had an oversight for next week. It may not impact, I don't know. Next Tuesday is graduation for the high school. So we didn't recognize that. It impacts me because I got a kid graduating. I don't know if it impacts anybody else, if they were planning on going to graduation versus council. I'm just letting people aware of that next week.
I actually usually hide on that day.
You usually hide? Yeah.
It's dangerous out there after that. Same as first of January or New Year's Eve. I hide then too.
Yeah, just an FYI for next Tuesday.
I do have one other comment on this, and there's a couple of things in here. Like increasing recycling standards, et cetera, there's a lot of that is out of our control. In other words, what do you do with the recycled materials? Where do they go? Right now, we're not shipping anything to China anymore. There's waste management and others like them are having a hard time trying to figure out where to do it. So they're putting it in landfills right now, which isn't helping anything that, we're trying to accomplish. So we have a couple of things in here that are really outside our control. We can still educate, we can still try to do some of the things that are said here, but when it leaves the city, it's no longer relevant to climate because it's being handled something different than what we recognize it being done. If that made any sense. Did that make any sense on that?
Mhm.
It didn't sound like it when it came back in my ears. So the one thing that that we need to be taken into consideration is those things that we have no control over once it leaves the city. So we can do all kinds of neat stuff, but once we hand it to somebody else, like recycled materials, all bets are off.
Any further comments? Thank you, Melissa. Do you have everything you need?
Just want to clarify,
Mhm.
is the council's desire to potentially adopt next week? So do I prepare a resolution or are you wanting to push it to the 20th or 27th? Just wanted to, it sounded like potential adoption for next Tuesday. Just want to double check.
So I did notice that you only gave us two options and there was a third option, not adopting it.
Well, that could be an option as well.
Okay, I just want to make sure that was clear.
Is there a need for a public hearing on this?
No need for a public hearing on it.
Okay.
I'm comfortable with next week.
Yeah, it's not going in the plan yet.
Right.
So
Any objections to next week?
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right, moving on. I am going to turn the microphone over to, thank you so much for being here. We have a training lined up on WICA's respecting the roles of policymakers and administrators.
Thank you, Council President. My name's Scott Snyder. I've practiced law for a long time with your city attorney. This presentation was developed in conjunction with the Washington City's Insurance Authority about 4.5 years ago. Why an insurance company is interested when councils have difficulty communicating either internally or with administration, it tends to cost money. And there's nothing more expensive than litigation within a city where the taxpayers are paying both sides of the freight. I'm a lawyer, so let's start with the disclaimer. What we're going to cover is a general outline of the law. Before Greg gets away, the last thing you're going to say is, yeah, consult your attorney. We're going to cover general things. A legal opinion is an application of the facts of the law. And as we'll say several times during this presentation, when your staff and your city attorney don't know what the facts are, trouble's in store. Thanks, Greg. Some basic guiding principles. Cities exercise power under the Constitution and through the statutes of the state. You have that power flows to you based on the classification of the city. You have the broadest powers available to any city by choosing the class that you have. The form of government also is implicated, whether you're a mayor council form of government or a city manager. You, the council, have to follow the existing statutes, ordinances, and resolutions until they're amended. And the same is true of the mayor and staff. You have those powers that have been specifically granted, along with those that you, by implication, you need to get the job done. The most important thing, as you know, is that public's work is done in public, at a meeting and on the record. And that structure really informs how you do your business as a council. And it also both empowers you and limits your powers as council members. Any of you who are thinking back to your first year on the council know that when you're elected, it's like wearing someone else's clothes. You're elected to public office and you want to do stuff. You had a campaign, you talk to citizens, you come in with an agenda. And the first thing that you find out is that the impact of long-term planning, multi-year labor agreements, required public hearings and processes, and particularly the budget, create an enormous systemic inertia. you've heard the expression trying to turn a battleship around, and trying to make changes in city policy ad hoc at a meeting is just that same feeling. That first, whether it's your first year or your 10th year on the council, you know that inertia is going to inform your decision-making process. The city council's power and authority, again, thinking back to the fact that this is your workplace, your powers are exercised by a majority of council members at an announced and open public meeting. Council members had the right to speak in accordance with council rules and cast a vote. And outside of the meeting context, the important thing to remember is that individual council members are limited to the same rights that each of your citizens have. Your authority is exercised in this chamber by a majority of you at an announced meeting with a quorum. Formal action, again, has to be taken in an announced public meeting. Regular meetings are set by ordinance to give the location and rules of conduct. I'm going to touch on rules of conduct several times during this presentation. And you as council member determine what those rules are. You've adopted them and we'll discuss them several times in the course of the presentation. By the way, I'm happy to take questions as we go along. Just to let you know, toward the end of the presentation, there are some discussion items that I hope you'll participate in. But if you have a question, would like anything clarified as I go along, please raise your hand. Council President, if you want to recognize them, or may I?
Please.
Thank you. Again, the open meetings law controls those meetings, and the open meetings law provides for special meetings. Okay, what's a meeting? This, as you know, is a topic that can lead to liability, both personal and for the city. A meeting is a meeting at which action is taken. Okay, that doesn't tell us much. Action is defined by state statute as the transaction of public business. And that definition leads us to a long list of individual items. The receipt of public testimony, a quorum of the council at a meeting on another subject who decide to take comments from citizens, you may be conducting a meeting. Deliberation, talking among yourselves or by email. You're all, I'm sure, aware of the dangers of the reply all function of email. Review of issues, evaluations, leading to sort of the thing that we think of as action, which is a final action, a collective decision of the council at a meeting by a vote. Executive sessions are authorized. You know the subjects, I'm sure. Not many national security issues unless you're running a public airport. But the other items on the list, evaluating applicants, receiving complaints, are all familiar to you, as are discussing with legal counsel the risks attendant to pending actions. As Greg probably has informed you over the years, the Public Meetings Act, Open Public Meetings Act, the attorney client cause has been tightened over the years. You need something specific. Merely having an attorney in the room doesn't give you the right to have an executive session. Labor negotiations are a little bit outside of the box in that they are not by definition a meeting. So the development of a labor strategy is not a meeting under the OPMA. You may have noticed that the rules on announcing when you're going to start, if you go to a recess to an executive session to develop a labor negotiation strategy, are different than you don't have to come back in the room and announce when it's over. Interesting PERC decision from 2019 about whether negotiation sessions are public meetings. And unless both parties agree to having an open negotiation, they are closed, and it's a permissive subject of bargaining. Special meetings can be called by the mayor or majority of council members. There's a 24-hour written notice provision, and action items are listed to those that are shown on the notice. Go ahead and pause here while we deal with the technical issue. No worries. Procedures. You've adopted some thoughtful rules of procedure and use them. Again, this chamber is your workplace as a council. This is where you get your work done. And the rules of procedure are adopted at your discretion. They're particularly helpful in avoiding PRA violations, such as the rolling quorum, and they help you establish a clear public record. I'm going to come back to your rules of procedure in a minute, and with an observation or two, and this is something I would appreciate your input on as we go forward. In Washington, cities you're a code city, you are granted the right to adopt those rules of procedure. And most of all, follow the rules. If the chair of the meeting, whether the council president or the mayor, makes a ruling, support that ruling. If you don't like the rule, change the rule. That's at your discretion. The council has adopted in your rules of procedure, Robert's Rules of Order. So in very certain situations, at your discretion, you can suspend your rules. Councils may do it to extend time frames for discussion. It's not uncommon. You do have that flexibility. The council adopts policy, and that's really one of your most important functions, obviously. And the information that you use can come from a wide variety of sources. When you're sitting as a legislative body, you can consider what you know, what you're told, as well as what you hear at a public hearing. Unless it's a quasi-judicial matter, which having a hearing examiner decision is a very limited proviso, you can use the information you get. And as you know, you gather information from advisory committees, staff, the community at large, standing in the checkout line at the market on your way home from work. You consider the merits of proposals and approve them or reject them. And in doing so, you analyze the community's needs, program alternatives, and most importantly, available resources. The budget and the comprehensive plan are powerful policy tools that are adopted by ordinance. And as we'll get another item that we'll discuss as we go forward, particularly the comprehensive plan has a public participation process. As you know, the CIP and the Transportation Improvement Plan, the Capital Improvement Plan, Transportation Improvement Plan have 6-year horizons. Again, when I was talking about inertia earlier, that 6-year horizon gives a gravitas to what you do. It's a weighty process and it's very important. And it's also because of that public participation plan, the public's heard from. And one takeaway I'd suggest is that veering or sudden changes in policy not only are difficult, but can also undercut those citizens who have taken the time to come to a public hearing and, in your November, January process, speak to the budget. Those people, citizens believe they've been heard. And I think they have a right to believe that that inertia will control the process going forward. Part of receiving information from the public and your constituents is complaints. You're going to hear complaints about the way city's conducting business and a specific employee. And they contact you again, could be at the supermarket. Keep in mind that you lack the authority to take action on any administrative matter. Be really careful. Take the information and we'll discuss how to use it, but be careful when discussing with citizens that, or to imply that something will happen. Because again, unless a majority of you vote in this chamber, it isn't going to happen, and no individual has the ability to bind the council. A council member can refer it to an appropriate staff person. You can raise it at a council meeting, get it on the agenda as your rules provide. And you can discuss complaints about public officials in an appropriately called executive session. I mean, obviously a council member can raise an issue at any meeting with staff performance or discuss it with the mayor. Remember that many of your employees are represented by unions and their rights are implicated. Councils can defame employees and when an issue is raised by the council, an employee under certain circumstances has a right to a hearing before the council. For that reason, complaints, I'd suggest, are best handled by going directly to the mayor or city administrator as is appropriate, or asking for an executive session to discuss the complaint and how to go forward. One thing about the executive session for handling complaints against public officials is you can discuss an item once, but after that initial discussion, the complaint, the employee needs to be notified or a public official needs to be notified, and they have a right to a constitutional name clearing hearing should that arise. This is the statute that governs interference by council members in a city manager form of government. And it notes that except for the purposes of inquiry, the administration, the council can't deal directly with the members of the administration. You have to work through the city manager. You can't give orders in the city manager form of government. And the provision goes on to say that the council is not prohibited from freely discussing with the city manager anything relating to appointments or removals of city officials. You're probably asking yourself, so why is this guy talking about a city manager form of government? The mayor council form of government, there is no similar statute, but the powers of the city council and the executive are virtually the same. Mayors commonly direct staff to respond through a process of designating contacts that can be, as in your case, the city administrator. Some cities go to the department head level. And that limitation is for a variety of very good reasons. You as a council spend months developing and approving a budget, how you're going to spend your money. If an individual council member can dictate the workflow of an employee, it's undermining your own budgetary decisions. The council can, by motion, request the mayor to do something or ask staff for something. You always have that ability. But when council members go directly to employees, it creates very difficult, let's call it power imbalance. As an employee is going to try and accommodate a council person. In a situation where that employee has been instructed that he or she should not respond directly to council, but should work through the city administrator, you're putting that employee in a very difficult situation. Now, a city manager and a city administrator are really two completely different roles. And I think it's important that you understand the differences. A city administrator speaks for the mayor. and exercises the powers that have been delegated to him or her by the mayor. The relationship of a city administrator and a mayor is a trust relationship, and it's very important that that be maintained. One of the messiest and most difficult cases I've handled in the last 40 years involved a sexual harassment complaint filed by a city administrator against the mayor, where both individuals had to continue to work together during the term of office until the issue was resolved. You can imagine how that played. But it's important to understand that the city administrator is acting at the direction of the mayor, serves at the pleasure of the mayor, and follows that or her directions. The position is authorized by the council and filled by the mayor. A city manager, on the other hand, has an entire statutory toolkit of powers. The city manager is protected by statute from council interference. Council members can lose their office by violating those requirements. And a city manager is appointed and removed by action of the city council. Those of us who have been in government for a long time develop what I'll call the no surprise rule. It's common sense. You won't find it in a statute anywhere. But the basic premise is avoid surprising someone, whether it's the staff, you as the council, or the administration. Building trust begins with communication. You as council and the staff and administration, it's a relationship, and it is founded on communication. Some of the corollaries to that no surprise rule is equal and timely response. It's incumbent on the mayor and the administrative staff, city administrator, to ensure that you get the same information from the staff and the administration in relatively the same time frame. I mean, somebody may ask and you respond, but you need to be able to trust that you're all getting the same information. Individual council members, there are other resources available to you. If the council as a whole doesn't want to pursue an issue, or you want to set the table to bring something to the council, as you're aware, I'm sure both the Association of Washington Cities and the Municipal Resources and Services Center, MRSC, can provide information to you if you want to pursue items, or again, often lay the groundwork for something you want to pursue. But keep your city attorney and administration in the loop. I've given this presentation about 20 times across the state, and I keep getting examples given to me. The best one I've heard at a presentation was in a city, a smaller city, where a council member decided they wanted to remove their city manager. And there's a statutory process for doing so. And the council member contacted MRSC, got the information needed, used their forms to draft a resolution. At the last meeting of the year, introduced a resolution to remove the city manager. Vote was taken, the city manager was removed. The problem was, had the council member asked the city attorney, he or she would have been informed that the city manager had a contract. And the removal taken the way that they did cost the city over $1 million plus the city manager's legal fees. Again, your city attorney you have a privilege with him. You can speak with him or her, him in this case. But be sure that he or she's in the loop, because there may be information that, again, that idea of general legal principles, which we're going to be discussing, and specific facts that aren't in the statute. Under that no surprise rule. the roles of the mayor and city council in policy making and in implementation. Council, you make the policy, mayor brings it forward, gets it done. The mayor should and does keep the council informed on city affairs, proposes policy, and implements the policy when it's been approved or adopted by the council. The mayor should report back to the council regarding policy implementation and possible improvements. You know how this works. You see a problem, you pass an ordinance to address the problem, and then we find out what we didn't know, what's just gone wrong. I early in my city attorney career had one of those situations where members of a neighborhood came in, complained to the council that they needed a traffic circle on their street. Council said, make it so. City engineer does. The next week, who showed up at the council meeting? Everyone else on the street who didn't want the traffic circle installed. Again, as you listen to city residents, you will keep track of their concerns and wishes. You discuss, develop, and adopt the policies that govern the aspects of city operations, and you make broad-based policy decisions. Those policy decisions are implemented on a day-to-day basis by the mayor, who has general supervision over all the administrative offices and affairs of the city. The mayor has to act within the budget. He's limited to the funds that you have appropriated. The mayor is required to enforce through the police and code enforcement the ordinances which you pass. The mayor administers the contracts which you as the council approve. And the mayor may request approval for civil litigation to enforce contract provisions. Mayor administers the contract. Only the council can approve bringing a lawsuit, a civil lawsuit. The council creates administrative structures through the budget process, by passing ordinances to address police powers, public health, safety, and welfare. You approve contracts and you approve the budget for the city's administrative structure. In labor and personnel, the mayor hires and fires. Now that hiring and firing power is subject to the civil service system, collective bargaining agreements, and individual employment contracts. If you as council have approved them, mayor has to act within the budget, and the council confirmation may be required for certain offices, and I'll come back to that in a minute. The mayor directs employees, but within the budget, within job descriptions, which are either adopted according to union contracts, most often civil service, or the council has the authority to establish structures and job descriptions and this ordinances. The city council, you've created a civil service system, it's in place. You direct negotiation and approval of collective bargaining agreements and employment contracts. I'll come back to that because that's another setting where the no surprise rule is important. There should be two-way communication throughout the negotiation process. The council approves a budget, provides for salaries and benefits through an annual salary ordinance, and you can establish departments, positions, and job descriptions. I mentioned earlier the idea of bringing complaints against public officials to the council in an executive session. Executive sessions are also used to examine the qualifications of applicants, complaints against public officials or employees. As I noted earlier, you have one opportunity to discuss the complaint. After that, if you want to go forward, the employee has the right to be informed of the complaint and have the right to a hearing, a constitutional name clearing hearing. There's a specific statute on that as subject is noted. Legislating the administrative structure. Again, as noted, you can by ordinance control the general structures and administrative structure of the city. You can approve job descriptions and confirmation of appointments. And let's pause there. I mentioned I'd come back to this. Most employees' job description are the subject of collective bargaining, and Anya Warrington has noted that the city council has not adopted many job descriptions in the past. That's in keeping with most cities where, again, that's either they're adopted through civil service or through the collective bargaining agreement process. Councils do adopt job descriptions for key positions, often new positions that are tied to the budget. You want someone to be, you decide you want a new structure in your city, the Wazir of Public Works or something, and the mayor comes forward in the budget, the council has the right to establish a job description. Many councils require confirmation of key positions, police chief, fire chief, the other key positions. The statute's interesting in that it implies that job descriptions and confirmation of appointments, you don't do both. You either establish a job description or provide for confirmation. In my experience, cities often do both, kind of in between the paragraphs of the statute. One suggestion is as you adopt a budget, avoid unnecessary detail in budget ordinances. And the example I'd give is salary line items versus the number of positions. If you have adopted in your salary ordinance the position of public works employee 1, public works worker 1 and 2, and there is a salary established. As you adopt a budget, you can provide for a certain number of positions by a line item that sets out a total of $200,000, and which the mayor can use to hire workers in that position. The reason I've kind of cautioned against being overly detailed, working with the city a few years ago, and the mayor wanted to hire 2 entry-level public works employees, save a few dollars. The problem was that the council had designated 1 public works worker 1 and 1 public works worker 2. By the time that the staff had invested and gone through an amendment to the city's budget, and with all the public meetings and work that entails, doubtful that they saved any money. The mayor has the right by statute to move monies around in the general fund unless limited by the council, providing flexibility to deal with unanticipated costs, changes in what your city needs from a personnel perspective. The councils are often asked to approve personnel manuals. And I just note, remember that as you review a personnel manual, remember in your mind, think the mayor directs employees. So those portions of the personnel manual that tell you how you submit your timesheet and that sort of day-to-day detail is a mayoral prerogative. Anything that costs money and that has a budget implication, the council has every right, should see, and every right to approve in a personnel manual. So as you look at the personnel manual, I'd suggest as council members, understand that the mayor's work rules are within his purview, but that anything that involves the expenditure of money is on your plate and your responsibility. Revenues and expenditures are strictly regulated in our state. Taxes are always a big issue, and the issue of taxes versus fees. That is a general raising of revenue. A fee is a service-based charge. Are important principles. Gifts of public funds, as I'm sure from time to time you run into, are closely regulated and prohibited. Expenditures must conform to the budget. And the mayor can move funds around, as I noted, subject to limitations established by the city council. What that means is if there's a balance of $800 in a certain department and a shortfall in another, that flexibility allows the mayor to deal with those sort of ups and downs of revenue and expenditure that occur during the course of the year. As mentioned earlier, and you know, there's enormous inertia in the budget system. I mentioned that your first year in office and you're coming in and you want to do something. And the first thing you figure out is that 60 to 80% of most city budgets are already set by employee costs, often through multi-year collective bargaining agreements. The 60 to 80%, if you've got a fire department, it's 80. If you don't have a fire department, it's typically 60. There are limits on revenue. The Iman amendments are the most obvious, but cities' resources are increasingly limited. And if you'll pardon me, one more story. When I started as a city attorney back in the dark ages, the 70% of Columbia, Missouri, a very nice college town where the University of Missouri is, 70% of the city's budget consisted of revenue from the state and federal government. As you know, those monies are gone. Both the state and the feds have long since stopped passing money to you. And due to the Iman amendments, your revenues are extremely limited. Therefore, both the budget system and long-term planning create that long-term inertia for you. The TIP and the CIP and the TIP are 6-year documents. Yes, you can change them, but as you know, they're really the key to your grantsmanship. And they're also the way that the public knows to come forward and speak long-term on the relative value of issues. They're 6-year documents. I mentioned grantsmanship and both the Growth Management Act is a requirement of a citizen involvement plan and just general principles of transparency. It's important that citizens know when they can be heard on these issues. The budget, by the way, I began preparation for a presentation by speaking with your council president, the mayor, city administrator, and others. And my understanding is that your budget process works well. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it unless you have questions. It's a process that you're familiar with. The mayor administers the budget. I mentioned his ability to make intra-fund transfers. The council's authorization is required for amendments for unforeseen situations or in order to use contingency funds you may have established. The council amends the budget. The statute provides a simplified method of amending the budget to deal with wages, hours, and conditions of employment. That's a helpful thing in the kind of economic setting we've been dealing with for the past number of years. A biennial adjustment could be made by a majority of the council, and a supermajority is required to decrease, revoke, or recall expenditures as part of your annual true-up. What I found over the years is, and we're talking about communication, or I'm talking, you're listening, communication, and that no surprise rule. During the course of the year, I found that trust is built where the administration will come forward, talk about shortfalls or revenue changes, things that need to be done, involves the council, notifies them in advance, gets prior approval. So when that annual true up comes back to make amendments to the mid-year budget, nothing's new. There's not, you've seen it before, your fingerprints are on it, you knew it was happening. Land use and planning, again, the mayor supervises the planning staff who make recommendations to the planning commission and the city council. Mayor supervises the staff that enforces the building code and other development regulations, supervises the permitting process. The council, on the other hand, adopts and amends development regulations, the comp plan. Again, general policy and with public participation. The council your city wisely uses a hearing examiner system, but the council still retains a quasi judicial capacity for certain land use decisions. Typically site specific rezones and development agreements. City expenditures and contracts, the mayor signs and supervises contract performance and enforces contracts. The council approves them and all other city expenditures. And importantly, the mayor has no authority to speak for or bind the city unless specifically authorized by an ordinance adopted by the city council. Now that can be the budget ordinance or approval of a contract to be administered. But that authority is a policy setting is the council's. The authorization for the mayor can be, particularly with regard to contracts, can be specific. The council can approve a contract. Most councils, as have yours, as have you, have adopted a small works roster to allow the staff to make the sort of, I used to say pencils, now let's say software and other periodic purchases of supplies and other smaller projects, so that the council's attention can be focused on larger matters. Think of it in terms of the budget. There may be a small equipment line in the budget that the council can, or the mayor can administer through the small works roster or smaller improvement projects under a specified dollar limit, while the council retains authority over those larger projects. And again, think about the transportation improvement plan and the capital improvement plan. Talked about communication frequently tonight. Effective contract negotiation, I think, begins or depends upon effective two-way communication between the administration and the city council. The mayor informs the city council and about let's say a labor agreement is coming up. And you know that your Teamsters contract will expire at the end of the year, and the mayor comes to the council and asks for specific negotiating authority, typically in one of those executive sessions. This may also be true about publicly bid contracts. It's key to the collective bargaining process. It also applies to legal settlements. One difficulty is that no bid contracts, you can only use an executive session to discuss a contract if it would influence the final cost. So if there aren't two people competing, no one's submitting a bid, unless it's real estate, you don't have an exception for no bid items. But back to the ones where you do, I'd suggest that building that trust relationship, it's important for the mayor to come to the council, get negotiating authority. And then as the negotiation continues, the mayor and staff negotiate, be sure to keep the council informed if you're on the administrative side. The Public Employment Relations Commission requires that in order to negotiate in good faith, your negotiating team have clear negotiating authority. That comes from the council. All this is designed to avoid is having a contract come back to the council and have it be voted down. That causes all kinds of problems. There's a retrograde bargaining is an unfair labor practice. Retrograde bargaining means backing up on an offer you've already made at the table. To avoid being in that situation, it's important that administration come to the council, get clear negotiating authority. As things change, come back, get further negotiating authority or direction. So when the matter finally comes back to the council, the administration can be confident that they've done what the council directed. Again, that contracting authority is yours, but what you want to avoid, and where communication is key, is you want to avoid a situation where a majority of the council votes down a contract that the administration believes has been negotiated within the parameters that it's been given. Timely communication again. The mayor and council have different roles in relationships with other entities. The mayor by statute presides at meetings. It's the ceremonial head of the city. One obscure thing that I love, if the governor declares martial law, the mayor's responsible for administering it. And that's also true in a city manager form of government, because they want an elected official, somebody that has been elected by the people to be the person, I don't want to say pulling the trigger, but at least directing what's going on.
And we need to change that.
That's funny.
The mayor pro tem is appointed by typically by the city council, in your case, council president. The city council decides whether the city will participate in various governmental organizations, who your representatives may be, and provides guidance to the mayor or other city representatives. As I'm sure you're aware, statutes sometimes declare that the mayor will be the representative, and other times that ability to appoint a representative is given to the council. The mayor has a very limited role in legislative matters in a mayor council form of government. Mayor has a tie-breaking vote, but only on matters other than the passage of an ordinance, the grant or revocation of a franchise or license, and the resolution for the payment of money. Mayor has that veto power. It can be overruled by a majority plus one of the council. I'm going to pause and take a drink. And I've been talking at you, and I really hope that you'll participate a bit in the session that follows and concludes, for those of you who are still with me. Like to dig into the council's right of inquiry, because this is often a can be contentious. The council wants to know something, or a council member wants information on a certain subject. How do you get it? You know, as I noted earlier, going around the council by individual, or council and administration by individual council members can subvert the budget. It impairs the priorities that you've set and the work that presumably staff are doing to follow your established priorities. Council members need to follow the path set by the mayor. In your city, that means getting information through the city administrator. And that means don't approach employees directly. We've talked, as noted, you've got other resources available to you. There are potential impacts from intervention. The appearance of fairness doctrine applies on if you're in that limited quasi judicial role. That would be specific to site-specific rezones and development agreement contracts. In those situations, any contacts you have to be revealed in the hearing process, and you have the potential for removal or recusal from participation. Conflict of interest plays into direct contacts by council with employees. The concept applies broadly to elected officials, appointed municipal officers, and potentially to family members. A city council member may not have a financial interest in a contract that's approved, and you cannot use your position to secure special privileges for yourself or for others. A conflict of interest, some are obvious, gifts or compensation for a service that you provide is prohibited unless specifically mentioned in the state statute. There can be no disclosure of confidential information which the council acquires, often in executive sessions. And it's important to understand that both fines and forfeiture of office are available under statute for a council member who violates those principles. The appearance of impropriety is different. I mean, it's a softer concept, but it goes to the kind of the heart of your ability to, well, stand in front of the citizens who have elected you and look them in the eye. Among the reasons that many mayors limit access to the staff is to avoid that appearance of impropriety. The power imbalance between an employee who wants to do, would like to give you what you're after, make it very difficult for the employee to say no. But the appearance that a council, when a council member contacts an employee, it can give the appearance that the individual is pressuring or lobbying staff on behalf of a citizen, whether that's a citizen, a neighborhood activist, or a developer. And a number of cities have adopted codes of ethics to deal with appearances of impropriety. This is the Black Diamond gavel grab. Council president and the mayor of Black Diamond, God love them. This was a year in which the city spent its entire legal budget in the first 3 weeks of the year and ended up being unable to provide public services by September because it spent most of its time in the King County Court. Sorry, where did I go? There. Just one comment for you. I mentioned you've adopted rules of procedure. Those rules are yours. You control this workplace as council members. One thing I note that was interesting to me, and you may want to consider going forward, is not legal advice, it's just a thoughtful comment perhaps about a hole in your rules. You have sections that deal with the conduct of the meeting, and the mayor or council president conduct the meeting according to those rules. You also adopt Robert's Rules of Order with regard to the conduct of the meeting. You have a section that talks about council members and their relationship to city employees, has speaking to city employees and how they should be treated. What I'd note is that there's no mechanism for the council to review or enforce that provision. Robert's Rules of Order provide that the council can hear motions of censure. That is, if you think a council member is out of line, any council member can make a motion for censure. If seconded, council would deal with it. I mentioned city codes of ethics. Many cities have, if a council is censured censured a council member, that council member could be denied a seat on a certain committee or limited in their functions. You can't remove someone from office. That's up to the voters. I just note that that particular portion of your rules of procedure doesn't have a mechanism directly for the council to enforce. It could be just as easy as having Robert's Rules of Order apply to that section as well as meeting conduct, but just something I noted. I've been talking at you, and I'd love to hear from you. Any questions, comments, thoughts?
Okay, so I actually have two. And this is geared more towards a hard rules, bright line rules. I think you've been very clear on best practices. So the first one is with regard to privilege and confidentiality with the city attorney, given that we are all part of the city.
Mhm.
If one person, be it a council member or someone from the executive branch, raised an issue with the attorney, how confidential is that amongst employees of the city?
Okay, and this is where a city attorney's duty of confidentiality is to the city as a whole. And there are a number of both ethical rulings and a lot of case law that come out of corporate situations where there's some kind of, imagine some sort of corporate wrongdoing, and the corporate attorney or city attorney are consulted regarding it. The attorney, if he believes there may be a violation of law, has an ethical duty to convey that information to the appropriate body, which most likely is the council. As a general rule, and this is what I've done for 45 years, and I'm good question for Greg, how he views it, that anything that you receive in confidence within that sort of cloak of the city. So if you were to confide in me, I would have an obligation to make sure that the other elected officials on the council were aware of it. There is no prohibition against those sort of communications. Now, the individual employee, that becomes more difficult. I think the general rule is the mayor is the elected official and perhaps the city administrator, but beyond that, unless that individual were key to a defense or legal response, the privilege would apply. Is that helpful?
That is very helpful. Thank you. The second question is regarding the right of inquiry. So it seems like it was discussed kind of in the context of within the city. How does that apply? Say, for example, the executive branch is dealing with an external party and someone on the council wants to do their own fact finding. What lines exist there and restrictions on what can and can't be inquired about, if any?
Well, let's see. You were asking for bright lines, and obviously a lot of what I'm talking about is in the gray area, which is why I'm talking about communications and relationships, right?
Right.
The one bright line is that any council member who involves him or herself in a matter that is before the council. The one bright line is you can't reveal any confidential information that you've received, particularly in an executive session. It's subject to both fines and potential forfeiture of office. If you want to go beyond that, then now we're back to you're the council. What do you want the rule to be? Because a council member, again, talking about stuff with citizens out in the world is what you do. So if, and this is where we're into that sort of very difficult gray area. A council member can definitely torpedo a negotiation by going directly around administration who's been informed by a majority of the council what they want done. I'd suggest if you want to go beyond that bright line about using confidential information and create it, it's up to the council to adopt a rule of procedure so that you can censure an individual who violates it, or take what other steps you think necessary. Censure is a slap on the wrist. Removing a council member from a committee or an outside, particularly an outside presence, can be, a strong incentive.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I got it. Yes, I just want to say, I hear Kathy Pugh out here. I do. I know she's not here, but she's still in my heart. She taught me so much when she was here in the city. The most important thing for me is to make no promises. You don't make promises, but you do listen to people. This is how I operate. And if I don't make a promise, but I listen, then I know who to ask. As anybody who knows me knows, I'm a question asker. I call them all the time. And we're very fortunate to have a city where I do get answers, and I appreciate that. But as long as I don't make a promise, and that really pretty much is what I would say the messages of all you said tonight. Thank you for coming. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And, you make a very important point. I'm glad you emphasized one that I made earlier. It can raise expectations. It can also create liability for the city if it's particularly promises in the context of a collective bargaining agreement or some kind of negotiation process. At its worst, and I think there's a Owens versus City of Independence, a Supreme Court case from many years ago, involved a situation where a city council had negotiated a parachute for a police chief who left, and everybody shook hands, and they conducted the discussion and a severance agreement in an executive session. And then one council member left the meeting, went out and had a press conference and blasted the police chief and said all kinds of things. What the Supreme Court case was about is, can a city council member impose liability on a city by their individual actions? And the answer was yes, to the tune of, this is like 1970, $10 million. I don't know how much that is today, but lots of money, you know. Other thoughts, comments? I appreciate your time. And again, if something comes up, ask your city attorney. Thank you.
Thank you. It's the end of our agenda. Meeting's adjourned.
Vote for that or something.